Hey everyone, welcome to episode 52 of the Miami Tech Pod. I'm Cesar. We're here with Brian and Maria, and our special guest this episode, Tyler McIntyer, the co-founder of Novo. Tyler, welcome to the Miami Tech Pod, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Miami Hack Week is over. We that was a huge success as we highlighted in our last episode, and we're kind of back to our regularly scheduled programming of highlighting amazing founders and operators building really cool things. So why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about Novo?
Sure. So Novo is similar to what you see with Chime and a lot of the challenger banks that are out there that are kind of like pushing into the consumer space. But what we are doing is we're really focusing on the small business space. And as a fintech, what we look to solve is these cash flow issues for essentially the 96.4% of small businesses doing less than $1 million of revenue a year. And so it's a huge long tail of these small businesses that you hear about it every single day, right? Like 2020, 4 million businesses started. And you have 2021, you got more than 5 million businesses started. Entrepreneurship is really becoming a new means of being able to create financial freedom as well as economic mobility within the United States. And today it's easier than ever to start a company. And most of the people we're talking to in the tech scene, most people you guys talk to are enabling that to happen because the barriers to entry are easier to start a business. The cost it takes to run a business is less. You can essentially link all your SaaS different providers together and not even have a back office anymore. And so you can have these concepts of a one-person $1 million businesses that have really never been possible before. And so that's really where we're trying to focus and kind of enable these small business owners to thrive and connect to all the tools that they use rather than kind of drop them into a $10 a month account that like the only way you can connect your tools is like exporting a CSV.
Now, kind of going back to the start of Novo, it's about a bit of a comeback story for Miami. Can you kind of share the kind of how it all started and how you ended up in Miami?
Sure. So me and my co-founder, Michael, both met here in Miami back probably around like 2009, 2010. So, 10 plus years ago, and really kind of started, we were in the scene. He was kind of working in a money manager. I was in the tech scene. And so we've always kind of exchanged thoughts, et cetera, but we found that the small business problem was always a huge one. So as we started kind of formulating the idea, we decided to kind of take the leap and go all in on this concept of Novo in around 2016. Our first office was actually on the WeWork in Lincoln Road. So there used to be a WeWork all the way at the end. And that's kind of where we first kind of started working on it, et cetera. We ended up leaving Miami, in search of capital and being able to raise things. So we bootstrapped the business for the first 2 years, and then headed up to New York City to try to go raise pre-seed rounds and seed rounds and talk to kind of more of the tier one investors that at that point in time, nobody really kind of took you as seriously as you would be taken today if you said that you're building a company in Miami that wasn't focused on Latin America. And so that's really kind of, Novo's kind of founded and started in Miami. We went up to New York for the last probably 2 to 3 years. As soon as COVID hit, Michael and I, we said we love Miami from a quality of life perspective, from the tax benefit, the business friendliness of it, and just the weather. Who wants to be in a 200 square foot apartment in the middle of the winter? So we moved down here before the whole, how can I help phase? And so we started getting here, and what we started realizing is, well, this is going to be a little bit longer than we thought. So we started encouraging other employees to move down here with us. And what we've eventually started seeing is that the ecosystem started drastically changing from what we had left. And at that point in time, we really started thinking that Miami is actually a viable place as a headquarters, because like it's like now more than just kind of a Playboy's paradise. It's a place on the map that VCs are coming to, new businesses are coming to, really, really strong talent. You look at, Hack Week, and it's like these people are alert and attracted, and they want to move here. And the amount of remote people who are working from here is incredible. So you have access to talent now, you have access to capital, you have all those different things that you typically had to like move out, and why Novo moved out for. And coming back here, we've raised over $130 million from Miami. And just to give you an idea, like, it's possible.
I mean, that's an incredible amount of money, like by any stretch of the imagination, anywhere, right? Do you think that it would have been slightly easier or a different process raising that money if you'd stayed in New York?
I think that the process has changed a bit, right?
Mhm.
And people during COVID have kind of been open to, doesn't really matter where you are. Previous, you'd have a lot of pressure to say, hey, and it's really around talent acquisition, right? If somebody gives you a bunch of capital, they want to make sure that you're going to be able to put it to work, that you can hire and retain and bring in the right talent pool to build products. If you're, nothing against it, but like random city, Wichita, Kansas, that talent pool might be a little bit more restricted than essentially San Francisco or the Bay Area or New York City, where you essentially have thousands of high growth startups and engineering talent that's coming out of it. And so that access to talent, those barriers kind of dropped. And so when we said that, hey, we're not in New York City, we're not in, San Francisco, et cetera, people, it was kind of the first time that people didn't bat an eye to that, right? People started saying, hey, okay, great, you can hire a remote if you need to. People are kind of working from home. And B, we're hearing that there's a lot of good talent relocating from New York, from San Francisco to Miami, to Austin, to these other cities that you'll be able to attract and get. And so, we've had board level conversations about Miami, and it's an interesting kind of change, right? Like, Alex Rampell just made it like a tweet of like, this is my boardroom view from a Miami kind of company he invested in. And it's such a stark contrast to essentially everything had to happen on Sand Hill Road. Everything had to happen in Flatiron. And like, that's how Union Square, like that's how you go raise, that's how you go hire. And that's like where your office needs to be. Today, COVID has accelerated the change to Miami, to realizing that talent is here, talent is willing to move here, and businesses can be built here.
Yeah, Tyler, thanks for sharing that. It's super interesting. It's a super interesting insight. I want to take a step back because I want to make sure that our listeners are super clear on the product and the offering to consumers that you have. So you all are a tech and software layer on top of a traditional bank, right?
Right. So we're essentially a fintech product that offers banking services. We'll start expanding into lending and a few other ones. We do have some other that we call ourselves a platform, because not only do we connect to other tools that you use, but we also provide our own tools. So we have budgeting tools that we've built out. We have invoicing tools. And then even when you kind of use some of the tools that we have, and you connect to integrations like, say, a Square or a Stripe, when you send an invoice with Novo, you can drop your Stripe credit card payout right there. They can check out with a credit card payment. We can automatically reconcile that money, and we can even speed up that money for you. And so it's a little bit more than just another fintech challenger player in the space. But at the heart of it, what it is really kind of like a bank account provided by our banking partner, our card, right? A debit card that you have. It's all fee free. It doesn't cost any money to have. It doesn't cost any money to have. There's no minimum balances, etc. And you can open the whole thing online, which is a stark contrast to most people. Yeah.
That's something the audio only listener, people tuning into the pod missed. So I'll share my story, because this is the first time we're meeting, but I actually have 2 Novo accounts. And I'll give you a little sense. This is going to sound like a bit of a commercial for your business, but I think it's a really important pain point that you all are solving for small businesses, right? In the middle of COVID, and I'm sure you all saw this hyper growth. This was like a thing in 2020, right around March. A former business partner and I were starting this company, and I went out and it was like so hard during shutdowns to open a business banking account. So I went to like Chase, and they were like, you have to have an appointment. You can't just walk in. And, like our appointments are extremely like, scattered throughout the week, and, we're on limited hours. So I finally got in, and I totally just opened an account. It took forever, all of the bells and whistles of like opening a business banking account. And a month later, they just send me a letter saying, "Hey, we closed your business account because you didn't have the required amount of capital in it." And it's interesting because we did. So I called them back and I said, "Hey, like, I'm just curious here. I think this was a mistake. Like we did have the required account. I'm looking at the terms and services for, this checking account." And they're like, "Yeah, sorry, we closed it, and there's nothing we can do about it." So it's like such a example of how like these traditional banking, they call themselves partners and resources to small businesses, but like such a simple thing as just being able to reinstate that, investigate whether they're right or not, and just help us out there. They were just like unwilling to, or the people that we're talking to were just not empowered to. So I quickly Googled how to open a business banking account online, and your SEO just smack in the middle of your
It's a
SEO
strong
strategy.
SEO game.
Yeah, put your link smack in the middle of my browser, and the rest is history, man.
Yeah.
And now the
we're-
podcast is a happy customer of Novo. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Do you think, Tyler, like, do you think that this sort of push to remote and push to virtual, it helped you guys on the operation side, like it makes it easier to recruit, makes it easier to grow and all that stuff, right? But conversely, it also makes it easier for small businesses to not worry about there not being a physical branch, right? And I know this is sort of reiterating what Cesar just said, but it's like, now more so than ever, there's less reason to build a physical branch, right?
Yeah. You could also brand it as, we're the banking of the metaverse, or whatever you want to call the
Oh,
I like that.
virtual, the web, etc. But it's
Tyler just doubled his valuation right there with that phrase.
Exactly.
it's overnight, huh?
Yeah.
What we've really seen is we over-index for essentially, like, let's just talk about average American cities, states, flyover states, etc. That like the ones that aren't major cities where you have millennials who are paying $600 for a credit card, right? These are the people that are concerned about ordering another drink at the bar because do I have enough money, etc. And they're running into real cash flow issues. And some of the people who are out there, they're solving problems for a very different set of customers. But those customers are pretty well serviced at banks, right? But where we really help is like in the underbanked populations, the minorities, the even the geographies that it's not easy for them to come into a branch, right? They don't feel welcome in a branch, etc. And so we've really found that we kind of skew towards the people who never really even felt comfortable coming to a branch, plus the people who really realize that like when I come to a branch, I have to essentially, I'm a nobody. I take a ticket, I sit down, I wait in line, and I get there, and then they tell me I don't have the documentation I need, right? And then I got to go back, I got to make the changes, etc. And so those are really, really kind of difficult parts, especially when the entire business is built around this. But what we've really found is the problem is that larger banks, they don't really treat these small businesses as businesses. They treat them as consumers, right? And they don't really care about them because they're not profitable. That's why if you go to like every major bank, there's going to be a minimum account balance. There's going to be a fee that they assess. They don't want your money. They don't want your account because you're not really profitable to them, right? And that's becoming more of an issue. And so when you think about both the people who say, hey, I don't want to go to a branch to kind of do things here, right? And also this like whole narrative, I guess secret narrative of existing players putting up roadblocks and barriers for small business to even be able to bank there, right? And then discourage the customers they may not want. We really found that like they love the fact that you could just do everything online without talking to a human, and you're a bit more than just, persona non grata walking through the doors.
Yeah, let me ask you this though, because there is a natural kind of trajectory of fintech companies where right now you're in a hyper growth stage. You probably have like, a really respectable valuation, especially if you've raised $130 million. Talk a little bit about where your revenue comes from, because I think from my perspective, like banks probably started off as like a remarkable value add to commerce, right, into small businesses, but they also viewed these deposits as a means to an end, right? And when shareholders at banks would essentially push the company to make more revenue, they had to find other ways to do it. And historically, like, that's where we start getting into a bit of the shady practices that banks have in terms of overdraft fees and, fees for actually storing your money there and all of that, because to your point, they are viewing bank account holders as like, a funnel to other revenue streams, right? Do you all think about it differently? Is that, what does Novo's revenue model look like in 10 years from now or 15 years from now, when you're not growing at 3-digit or 4-digit, whatever percent year over year numbers?
Yeah. So we, to kind of start talking about maybe how banks money, typically they'll charge fees. They do net interest margin. So you give them money and then they lend out that money to somebody else. And very, very, very small is the card transaction fees. And so there's this misconception where it's like, if you're not being charged, you're the product. In our case, that's further from the truth. What we have is we have a very strong fundamental belief that banking should be free, and it shouldn't be seen as a privilege of people. It should be seen as a right of these business owners. And this is when you get into issues of like, hey, somebody just said they don't want to bank you, and they just close your account and tell you to like pound sand. We really want to be able to support all these business owners on our platform. And so we believe that the core product of banking should be free. And that's, we want to help the smallest entrepreneurs who have no revenue or just an idea that somebody's come up with, registered a business, and, it needs a bank account. And they don't want to pay $10 a month, and they don't have any revenues, and, they're not ready to commit $10,000 to just sit there. So that's kind of our kind of key assumption and thesis there. The second part is, how do we actually make money if we're not charging anybody any of our customers money and we're not selling their information? There's something called interchange. And so every time you swipe a card, right, your Novo debit card at a merchant, that merchant typically pays Stripe something like 2.9% or Square or some one of those processors. Out of that 2.9%, about say 70% of that would come back to us as what is known as the issuer processor, right? And so, through the payment value chain, we take the largest portion of that card transaction, right? Which is not you, the customer, paying for it, but the actual, like, where you're going to the merchants and to the different places. So when you buy something on Amazon, right, we might get $100 item, we might get $1.50, $2 back on that purchase as revenue coming back to us. And so that's how we're able to subsidize the cost of these things. And as we continue to grow as a company, right, what we're looking at is really, how do we offer other lending solutions that small businesses have never been able to have access to, right?
Let me unpack that really quick before we go to Maria, then Brian here. But the value of being that intermediary is to make sure that transaction, one, goes through, two, it like is actually like authenticated, and actually, the consumers on both ends, the consumer and the provider of the service, have like faith that there's someone in the middle like facilitating the transaction. Is that right? Is that the way to think about it?
So yeah, so it's actually a really interesting concept that essentially this is a huge industry if you look at how many transactions are going on card, but every single card transaction has a cost, right? And this cost is called interchange typically, right? Or processing cost. And so when you send it through like a Visa or MasterCard network, et cetera, the pitch to the merchants are saying, hey, not everybody walks around with cash, and they don't walk around with thousands of dollars of cash, et cetera. So if you're at Best Buy, you are a local store, you are whatever it may be, a hardware supply company, um, people will buy more from you and more often, and you would not have to deal with the aspect of having all this cash and depositing and getting a Brinks truck to show up, et cetera, for a very small fee, right? And we make your accounting easier, and there's all these kind of value adds. But the real sell on accepting cards is that people love the ability to just go in there and buy whatever they need and exchange that value very easily, right? And that's kind of where the tolerance come in from the merchant side. And so that is kind of how that revenue line has been created. And so what they've essentially done is saying, hey, because the bank is the one that's make sure that the accounts there, they're taking the risk on the customer. If they say that this card transaction is good, like that bank is going to be liable for this, right?
Tyler,
Even
the kids know it as gas fees these days.
Yeah, it's 100% what it is. Essentially, it's a gas fee, and so part of it gets, sent to the person facilitating it, right? The transaction itself, and another one might be to another minor. Instead of burning it, it would come to the bank.
That is really interesting. I don't think I ever had a really good grasp on the inner workings of these, banks and fees and software. So I know you guys have been growing a lot and are actively hiring. Would love to hear kind of locally, the size of the team. Are you hiring locally, remote? How you guys are thinking through that? And any plugs for folks in the ecosystem looking for roles?
Yeah. So we are hiring pretty much across all roles, right? Like beginning of last year, we were about I think 40 people. Today we're sitting at about 160 people, and we're looking to scale up to about 350, 400 people. Probably by the end of this year, if we can kind of hit some of our hiring goals. That means there's a tremendous amount of opportunities all throughout the company, right? And so key areas that we're looking at is any engineers, right? So if you want to work on really interesting tech, come to us, because instead of sitting on top of a VAS, we've built out all that tech ourselves. Everything that touches the core to what's in the customer's hand is what we've developed instead of sitting on top of another platform. And so we're working on really interesting ledgering technologies with Kafka and kind of streaming in transactions and processing, and we're moving $1 billion a month in payment volume. And so you're really doing this at scale. Product people, so if you're interested in building product and things like that, signers, compliance people, everything. We're hiring like 4 lawyers even. So if you're thinking about going from practice to private or in-house, please feel free to reach out to us at tyler@novo.co. Would love to kind of absolutely hire in Miami, right? Definitely a skewed preference. Got a great place in Brickell. But we're open to remote roles as well. And we also have an office in New York City. So it's kind of one of these flex where if you want to come to the office, you're able to.
Okay, I'm putting you on the spot a bit, but something that's come up recently I think it was in an article that we were talking about offline, was salaries. And, I think historically there has been this narrative in Miami of, hey, you could pay people less here. And now with so much remote work, it's gotten much more competitive. So how are you guys looking at salaries? Do you adjust it for the city? Are you finding that it's much more competitive in what you have to pay to get this top talent?
I would say that, yes, it is absolutely more competitive when you have to get this top talent. You just look at the amount of, funding that's kind of happened. It's incredible. And that's all going to get plowed into, let's hire some R&D and hire people. And that's everything from the IPOs all the way down to $20 million pre-seed rounds. Like 90% of those funds are really just around hiring more people to build these products. So we've absolutely seen kind of challenges in kind of scaling up for it. But what we strongly believe is we want to hire the right people, and we want you guys to be working with the smartest people around us. And what does that mean? That we don't try to cut corners by saying we're not going to hire somebody because that's a New York City salary in Miami, right? Typically, what we find is we will pay somebody in New York City their New York City salary, like we have, and they would move to Miami, and then they would get the bonuses of not paying New York City taxes. They would get the bonuses of having quality of life. If they want a dog
That's
or a
what's
kid, they
driving
can
up all
actually
our
do that.
rent.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, but you're right. Yeah, I know someone who was recently looking for a place, and they were just shocked. And they were moving from New York, and they were just shocked that every apartment has a washer dryer here. And like, I think their boundaries are a lot. I guess their expectations are much lower compared to us. I just saw another building that's like, we have a golf simulator and a daycare, and so I think they're having a great time looking at all the amenities here.
Listen, it's like an arms race for amenities at the luxury level, you know. But so Tyler, you and I have known each other for like, I don't know, 12 years, maybe 10 years at this point now, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember when like we met when you were a college student at UM, right? And you would come into the Launchpad, and I was a volunteer mentor. And
That is an old man move, Brian. You're
Yeah.
like, Tyler, we met when you were just a baby. And
you were in entrepreneurial diapers, so to speak. But actually, like, so I'm curious, like, this is, you know, it's in your blood, right? Being an entrepreneur and all this stuff. And, you know, and this is the biggest company you've ever run by far. Like, this is a big company by any standards. But like, what are some of the things that like shocked you that you've experienced with Novo that, you know, back in the day when you were running small, you know, 4 to 5 person businesses, like you didn't run into, right? So like, share with us, you know, what are some of the things that you didn't expect, but have been either pleasant or unpleasant surprises of running a business at scale?
Yeah. So, you know, first, you know, I love kind of the mission of Launchpad, and a lot of the empathy of which I have today has come from volunteering and helping there. It's a very drastic change between running a 10-person company and running a 150-person company, and the speed and the growth, the revenues, the problems, the issues on the day-to-day basis. And one of the things that I love about Miami, which you really don't see in other places, is this kind of like real giving back of people back into the community. And so here, I also want to extend it. You know, if you guys are anybody, you know, listening in who are running into challenging issues where you're trying to scale, et cetera, feel free to reach out as well. And, you know, I can provide free advice for whatever it's worth on kind of some of these challenges. But, you know, things that I've really struggled with is like a lot of the HR aspects, right? Around before, you were just able to just say, hey, let's all just get into a room and hack on projects, right? And today it's about coordination and how do you build teams around the projects that you wanted to achieve. The fact that, you know, you have to, you know, sometimes cut back on all your ambitions because, you know, the more people running in different directions, actually, like, the harder it becomes to actually wrangle in and make sure that we're delivering on stuff. And kind of, you know, what we dub this internally is kind of going from founder to CEO, right? Or founder to an executive. And that's a big drastic change between what your responsibilities are. And, you know, the way that I describe it is, you know, I go from understanding that in the early days, like, I loved it because like I knew that I was impacting the product, right? That I was building and improving the product. And in the state that we're in now, like what I've like had to take a step back and realize that like the company is now my product that will build the actual product and the end products. And so how do I invest in the companies, the mechanics, the people, the culture, the you know, even the day-to-day, like, you know, what is the meeting cadence type of the questions, to be able to drive towards, you know, higher outputs versus being in like the day-to-day, the fun stuff of, you know, hey, you know, which, you know, top bar nav are we going to use for the new site, right? So it's been a change, and it is challenging, but it's exciting. I'm definitely on the, you know, the edge of my learning curve, to kind of, you know, try to capture some of this new information.
Yeah, I figured you were going to say HR because like that's one of the like sort of the recurring themes that people don't really realize that like once you get past a certain size, like HR is really your biggest challenge, right? Because like back in the day when you were hacking on little like on a small project, right, you could hire someone off of Upwork and hit the ground running and have a product out in a week, right? And now you're like, well, I gotta go through and see get legal to review this, get HR to review this person working on this with us, and so on and so forth. And you lose a little bit of that flexibility, but the scale that you gain is tenfold, right? Or 100-fold. But so that's interesting. And I think our audience will appreciate, being able to sort of pick your brain on these kinds of things as they grow.
Tyler, thanks for joining the Miami Tech Pod, man. It was really great
Thank you.
to hear your story and have you, really chat about the journey, but also you did something that's really important. I just want to make sure that people highlight and take you up on it. This all works when people pay it forward and offer to help as a resource. And your willingness to say, hey, if you're starting off and you may be a couple of years behind where we're at today and you need some advice, a sounding board, all of that, I think that's the most powerful thing of the phase of Miami Tech that we're at right now. And just I really appreciate that. I wanted to make sure that we highlighted it again.